The virtual CISO moment is brought to you by vCISO Services, a leading provider of quality and experienced virtual chief information security officers for small and mid-sized businesses. Check them out at vcisoservices.com. Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment Infosec wrap-up for Friday, March 17th, 2023. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And slightly delayed in starting this because an interesting error popped up when I first started the live stream. Told me that Facebook was not going to live stream because one of the links that I have in the show notes is bad. Apparently, the hack read link goes against their community standards. So when we get to that article, we'll see what about that might be bad. But anyway, let's get into today's news update. From Bleeping Computer, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, revealed in its 2022 Internet Crime Report that ransomware gangs breached the networks of at least 860 critical infrastructure organizations last year. However, given that the FBI's report only includes attacks reported to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, the actual number is probably quite higher. Quote, from the FBI, the IC3 received 870 complaints that indicated organizations belonging to a critical infrastructure sector were victims of a ransomware attack. Of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, IC3 reporting indicated 14 sectors had at least one member that fell victim to a ransomware attack in 2022. In total, ransomware victims filed 2,385 complaints throughout 2022. With adjusted losses of over $34.3 million. That's a lot of coin. The FBI advises against paying ransoms to cyber criminals since payments, first of all, do not guarantee that the victims will recover their files. They may encourage further attacks and will most likely be used to fund additional attacks. Of course, when you're in the position and you need to get your business up and operating, it's a little bit harder to just go along with a blanket advice like that. I understand. Victims are urged to report ransomware incidents to IC3, which will provide critical and crucial information to track their attackers and prevent future attacks. Next up, from the Hacker News, multiple threat actors, including a nation-state group, exploited a critical 3-year-old security flaw in Progress Telerik to break into an unnamed federal entity in the United States. Now, this disclosure comes from a joint advisory issued by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, the FBI, and the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, aka MSISAC. According to the agency's quote, exploitation of this vulnerability allowed malicious actors to successfully execute remote code on a federal civilian executive branch, FCEB, because we need more acronyms, agency's Microsoft Internet Information Services, IIS, web server. The indicators of compromise, IOCs, associated with the digital break-in were identified from November 2022 through early January 2023. Tracked as CVE 2019-18935, a CVSS score of 9.8 out of 10. The issue relates to a .NET deserialization vulnerability affecting Progress Telerik UI for ASP.NET AJAX that, if left unpatched, could lead to remote code execution. And here's the article that Facebook did not want to have on the live stream, the URL to it. HackRead reports that 2 U.S. citizens were charged with hacking into DAA portal in 2022. That's the Drug Enforcement Agency, I believe. Both suspects, Sagar Steven Singh and Nicholas Saraolo, probably mispronouncing that, were reportedly members of a notorious cybercrime group, Vile, capital V, lowercase I, capital L, capital E. That sounds like something from the 1960s. Get Smart. Was it Control and Chaos were the pro and the cons there? Anyway, 2 U.S. citizens have been charged with hacking into the U.S. DEA online portal using fake emergency data requests from hijacked government and police email accounts. Their primary objective was to blackmail and extort victims. According to the press release from the U.S. Department of Justice, the 2 accused hacked into the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, online portal, which is connected to 16 federal government law enforcement databases. The two suspects are allegedly associated with a criminal organization that specializes in making fake emergency data requests via compromised email accounts of police and government officials to extort their victims. The DEA portal hacking involved Doxbin's current admin, KT, who had been referred in the government complaint as CC-1. The individual is listed as the top of Vile's official roster, followed by Weep and Ominous. This almost sounds like a Hollywood script. As per the government, the defendants and other Vile members used different methods to access the victim's private information, such as tricking computer service personnel, sending fake legal processes to social media companies to obtain users' registration details, corrupting company employees, illegally accessing non-public U.S. government databases and email accounts of foreign officials, and searching for public-private online databases. Mr. Zuckerberg, what was wrong with that article that we couldn't go live with that URL? Please let me know. I'll be waiting for your response. From Cyberscoop, U.S. intel's Chinese influence operations are growing more aggressive, more similar to Russia's. China is stepping up efforts to influence U.S. public opinion, which increasingly resemble Russian operations. U.S. intelligence officials warned on Wednesday, that's this past Wednesday, that China is stepping up its efforts to carry out influence operations against the United States, and that its efforts to influence American public opinion increasingly resemble Russian operations. Now, this in testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee and the U.S. intelligence community's annual threat assessment published on Wednesday. U.S. intelligence leaders cautioned that China represents perhaps the leading threat to U.S. power and that the conflict between Washington and Beijing is increasingly playing out along technological lines. Here's a quote. The People's Republic of China, which is increasingly challenging the United States economically, technologically, politically, and militarily around the world, remains our unparalleled priority, according to the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. This during her testimony on Wednesday before the committee. In the event of a conflict with the United States, the threat assessment concludes that China, quote, almost certainly would consider undertaking aggressive cyber operations against U.S. homeland critical infrastructure and military assets worldwide. That is a quote from Captain Obvious. No, not really, but that just does seem to be an obvious statement in my mind. The Register reports that Lockbit brags will leak thousands of SpaceX blueprints stolen from the supplier. Now, so Lockbit, the ransomware gang, has boasted that it broke into Maximum Industries, which makes parts for SpaceX, and stole 3,000 proprietary schematics developed by Elon Musk's Rocketeers. The prolific cybercrime crew also mocked the SpaceX Supremo and threatened to leak or sell on the blueprints from March 20th, I guess on March 20th, which is in a few days. If the gang's demands to pay up aren't met, this may therefore be a bill that Musk can't avoid to reconcile like others. Quote here, I would say we were lucky if SpaceX contractors were more talkative, but I think that this material will find a buyer as soon as possible. This is what Lockbit posted on its dark web homepage. According to a screenshot shared on Twitter, ironically, by security analyst Dominic Alvieri. So we take, according to the article, the broken English to mean that Maximum Industries may not be willing to cough up so far, yet the gang believes that it may be paid either way. The ransom demand is provided to ensure any stolen files remain unpublished, or someone else will purchase a copy of the data anyway. Now, what's interesting is that the schematics by themselves may not be that useful. You still have to manufacture the parts, which is non-trivial, and then use them without selling, unless you're printing them through 3D printing. I've seen that a rocket apparently was going to go up that was completely 3D printed, not from SpaceX, but I digress. And then use them without selling off suspicion. A leak would still be embarrassing and might affect unwarranted attention from U.S. government for the crooks and the businesses involved, given the reliance on SpaceX to launch stuff for the United States government. Next up, this from Cybersecurity News. Chinese and Russian hackers using Silk Loader malware to evade detection. Risk action clusters affiliated with the Chinese and Russian cybercriminal ecosystems have been observed using a new piece of malware that is made to load Cobalt Strike onto contaminated equipment. Now, this is dubbed Silk Loader by Finnish security company WithSecure. And the malware leverages DEL aspect loading procedures to supply industrial adversary simulation application. Silk Loader joins other loaders, these types. A little bit of bad English there, I suppose, from the article, as Kobold Loader, Magnet Loader, and Lithium Loader that had been a short while ago learned incorporating cobalt strike factors. This article does sound like it was translated using a pretty poor translator. It also shares overlaps with Lithium Loader in that both equally employ the DLL side loading process to hijack a legitimate software with the objective of functioning as separate malicious dynamic hyperlink library. Functioning. Anyway, you can check out the rest of the article in its bad translated English in the show notes. Joining the US and Europe, UK bans TikTok from government mobile phones. According to The Guardian, Britain is to ban the Chinese-owned video sharing app TikTok from ministers and civil servants' mobile phones, bringing the UK in line with the US and the European Commission and reflecting deteriorating relations with Beijing. This decision marks a sharp U-turn from the UK's previous position. It came only a few hours after TikTok said its owner, ByteDance, had been told by Washington to sell the app or face a possible ban in the country. The UK's announcement was made on Thursday by Oliver Dowden, the Cabinet Office Minister, in the Commons. He said that the ban was taking place, quote, with immediate effect. The decision follows a review of TikTok by government cybersecurity experts, which began in November, Dowden said, and will cover ministers and civil servants' work phones, but not their personal phones. This, quote, is a proportionate move, based on a specific risk with government devices. Now, the UK Cabinet Office said that TikTok required users to give permission to the app to access data stored on the device, which is then collected and stored by the company. Allowing such permissions gives the company access to a range of data, including contacts, user content, and geolocation data. And according to Dowden, this then justified the ban. All right, and then we move into today's list. Of course, I like to take a list of something that seems interesting and share it with you with my comments. This list today, Sophos best practices for securing your firewall. So we'll have fun with this. This should be basic stuff. Maybe there's something in there that I haven't thought about before. I wouldn't bet on it. So starting from the article, which again, the URL is in the show notes. And of course, I have not read this before. While your Sophos firewall is a security product, it also needs to be secured. So I guess this is talking about how to secure a Sophos firewall, but I imagine that this would work towards any firewall. Number one, update the firmware with every release. Okay, updating firmware is a good idea. But more so if you really need to update it. If there's a firmware that comes out that addresses something that you're not actually using in your firewall, then don't update it. If you don't want to, there's always the risk of implementing an update that has an issue. So that's why it's important to read the firmware notes, the update notes. There's certainly on the flip side, if there's a critical update for a service that you are using with the firewall, then definitely consider updating immediately. And then, okay, enable hot fixes. This is kind of along the same line. Occasionally, patches for vulnerabilities and other security fixes are released between regular firmware updates. So same methodology there. Number three, limit access to firewall services. So they're saying that you should periodically check the device access settings and ensure that all unnecessary services are disabled on the WAN. Well, they're talking about, anything, you should always disable unnecessary services, because basically you're taking on risk without reward. We talk about that an awful lot in information security and risk management. As one example, one of my favorite ones is that if you don't need to keep information somewhere, why are you keeping it? Because then you got to expend cycles to protect it if it's confidential information, and you still have the risk in case it gets out. Same thing here. If there's something on your firewall that you're not using, turn it off. Utilize multi-factor authentication and role-based administration. I think this one has been talked about quite often. I'm not going to go through it again. Additional best practices for securing your network from ransomware. They say to look at our recommended, this is Sophos, for best practices for securing your broader network from the latest ransomware and other advanced threats. This is more of a sales guide here. So anyway, some good information with regards to securing your firewall. I don't disagree with any of that. And that's it for today. I still don't understand why Facebook Live was not wanting to stream that, but that's okay. They're a private business. They can really do what they want. And they just missed out on streaming the podcast. So I hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday with the Quick Strike. And until then, stay secure.